The soft hum of the air conditioning did little to soothe Eleanor Green as she stood in the immaculate penthouse bathroom, adjusting the simple black dress that had been laid out for her. Tonight, she would be accompanying her employer, Maxwell Blackwood, to what he had described as the most important dinner of the year. Her reflection stared back at her, honey blonde hair pulled into a neat bun, minimal makeup enhancing her natural beauty, and a pair of intelligent green eyes that betrayed a depth most people failed to notice. For 5 years, Eleanor had worked as Maxwell's household manager, though personal maid was how he introduced her to others. It wasn't the title she minded, it was the dismissive tone that accompanied it. The daughter of a small-town schoolteacher from Vermont, Eleanor had put herself through college, earning a business degree with honors before the recession of 2008 swept away her dreams of starting her own company. Taking the position with Maxwell had been meant to be temporary, just until the economy recovered. Now, 5 years later, she found herself still here, organizing his life with precision, while he barely acknowledged her existence beyond her function. Maxwell Blackwood was New York's golden boy, the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a sprawling empire with interests in everything from real estate to energy. At 42, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Tall, with dark hair peppered with distinguished silver at the temples, he moved through life with the certainty that everything and everyone had a price. His late father had built the company from nothing, but Maxwell had expanded it tenfold, earning him the reputation of a business genius and the arrogance that often accompanied such success. "Eleanor," his voice echoed through the penthouse. "The car is waiting. Let's not keep the future of Blackwood Industries standing on the sidewalk." She took a deep breath, grabbed the small clutch purse that contained only her phone and a compact, and made her way to the foyer. Maxwell stood impatiently by the elevator, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "Remember," he said without looking up, "you're there to make me look good. Pour drinks, smile at the appropriate times, but otherwise, keep quiet. These people are the key to the Silicon Valley expansion, and I need them focused on my vision, not distracted by the help." Eleanor nodded, swallowing the retort that bubbled in her throat. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." The ride to the summit, Manhattan's newest and most exclusive restaurant, perched on the 78th floor of a sleek skyscraper, was silent. Eleanor used the time to mentally rehearse the names of the dinner guests from the list Maxwell had casually tossed at her that morning, expecting her to memorize every detail about each person by evening. The maitre d' recognized Maxwell immediately, bowing slightly as he led them to a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering New York skyline. 4 people were already seated: James Thornton, the venture capitalist, whose fund had backed some of the most successful tech startups of the past decade; his wife Vivian, a former model who had reinvented herself as a sustainable fashion entrepreneur; Caroline Chen, the brilliant head of research at a leading tech company; and Daniel Foster, the soft-spoken but influential editor of Business Insider magazine. "Maxwell!" James stood, his smile wide but his eyes calculating. "Right on time, as always." Maxwell stepped forward, shaking hands and making introductions. Eleanor noted how he positioned her slightly behind him, as if she were an accessory rather than a person. "And this is Eleanor, my personal assistant," he said dismissively, already turning back to James to discuss the recent fluctuations in the market. Eleanor smiled politely and took the only remaining seat, which happened to be next to Daniel Foster. The editor gave her a curious glance, but was quickly pulled into Maxwell's orbit as he began describing his vision for the future of Blackwood Industries. "The Silicon Valley campus will revolutionize how we approach clean energy," Maxwell declared, his voice commanding attention. "By bringing together the best minds in tech and energy, we'll create solutions that are not only profitable, but will position Blackwood as the leader in sustainable business for the next century." The waiters appeared with the first course, a delicate arrangement of sea scallops that cost more than Eleanor's weekly salary. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone. Market projections, investment strategies, names of influential people dropped like casual currency. Of course, the real question, is whether these initiatives actually benefit the communities they claim to serve, Caroline Chen said during a momentary lull. Corporate social responsibility has become such a buzzword, but how many companies truly put resources behind their promises? Maxwell waved his hand dismissively. The primary responsibility of any business is to its shareholders. These community programs make for good PR, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is what matters. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a small but persistent voice that had been growing louder over the years. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "I disagree." The table fell silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to her, Maxwell's narrowing dangerously. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice deceptively soft. Eleanor knew she should back down, smile apologetically, and return to invisibility. But 5 years of biting her tongue had worn her patience thin. "I said I disagree. Corporate social responsibility isn't just about PR or being charitable. It's about recognizing that businesses exist within communities and ecosystems, not separate from them. When those communities thrive, businesses thrive." She paused, aware that she had crossed a line, but unable to stop. For example, Blackwood's proposed development in Newark could include affordable housing and community spaces without significantly impacting profits. The goodwill generated would open doors to partnerships with local governments and non-profits, creating opportunities for innovation that might otherwise be overlooked. The silence that followed was deafening. Maxwell's face had turned a dangerous shade of red, but before he could speak, James Thornton leaned forward, his expression intrigued. "That's an interesting perspective, Eleanor. Have you worked in community development before?" "I studied business at NYU with a focus on sustainable development," she replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Before the recession, I had planned to start a consultancy focused on helping businesses implement socially responsible practices that also improved their bottom line." "Fascinating," Caroline murmured, studying Eleanor with new interest. Maxwell's chair scraped loudly as he stood. "Eleanor, a word outside, please." The hallway outside the private dining room was deserted, the soft lighting doing nothing to soften Maxwell's fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, looming over her. "You're here to pour wine and look pretty, not share your community college opinions with people who move billions of dollars with a phone call." Eleanor felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "NYU is hardly a community college, Mr. Blackwood, and those opinions come from years of education and research." "I don't care if they came from God himself," Maxwell snapped. "You've embarrassed me in front of the exact people I need to impress. You're fired. Get your things from the apartment tomorrow when I'm at the office." Eleanor stared at him, the reality of her situation crashing down. She had no savings to speak of, having sent most of her salary home to help her mother with medical bills. The job market was still brutal, and now she had no reference from her employer of 5 years. But looking at Maxwell's contemptuous expression, she realized she couldn't go back to being invisible. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll have my things out by noon tomorrow." She turned to leave, but Maxwell grabbed her arm. "Where do you think you're going? You came with me, you'll leave with me, after dinner." "I'm no longer your employee, Mr. Blackwood. I'll find my own way home." She gently but firmly removed his hand from her arm and walked toward the elevator, her heart hammering in her chest. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Eleanor leaned against the wall, closing her eyes briefly. 5 years of stability gone in an instant. She should have felt terrified, but instead, a strange sense of liberation washed over her. For the first time in years, she had spoken her mind. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. What she didn't know was that Daniel Foster had stepped into the hallway just in time to witness her dismissal. And as he watched the elevator doors close, he pulled out his phone and made a call that would set in motion events neither Eleanor nor Maxwell could have anticipated. Eleanor's apartment in Astoria was a far cry from Maxwell Blackwood's luxurious penthouse. The one-bedroom walk-up with its mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves was modest, but it was hers, the one place where she didn't have to be invisible or silent. She kicked off her heels at the door and collapsed onto her worn sofa, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. 5 years of employment gone in an instant. She should have been panicking, but instead, she felt oddly calm. Pulling out her laptop, she began updating her resume, determined to start fresh come morning. Her phone rang at precisely 8:30 a.m. the next day. The number was unfamiliar, but Eleanor answered anyway, expecting a collection agency or telemarketer. "Is this Eleanor Green?" The voice was deep and measured. "Yes, speaking." "Ms. Green, this is Daniel Foster from last night's dinner. I hope I'm not calling too early." Eleanor sat up straight, her free hand smoothing her sleep-rumpled hair as if he could see her. "Mr. Foster, no, not at all. How did you get my number?" A soft chuckle. "I'm a journalist, Ms. Green. Finding information is what I do. But more importantly, I'd like to meet with you today, if possible. I have a proposition that might interest you." 3 hours later, Eleanor found herself sitting across from Daniel Foster in a quiet corner of a cafe near Bryant Park. He was more imposing in daylight, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and keen blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I'll get straight to the point," he said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "I witnessed your disagreement with Maxwell Blackwood last night. While his reaction was unprofessional to say the least, what really caught my attention was your insight about corporate social responsibility." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. "I shouldn't have spoken out of turn." "On the contrary." Daniel leaned forward. "What you said resonated with something I've been researching for months. Corporations that genuinely invest in their communities consistently outperform those that don't, especially over the long term. But the story lacks a strong voice, someone who understands both the business side and the human impact." He slid a business card across the table. It wasn't for Business Insider as she'd expected, but for Horizon Partners, one of the most progressive investment firms in the country. "James Thornton was also impressed by you," Daniel continued. "He's a silent partner in my other venture, this firm. We're building a new division focused on exactly what you talked about, helping businesses implement social responsibility initiatives that strengthen both communities and bottom lines. We need someone to lead it, someone with vision and integrity." Eleanor stared at the card, then back at Daniel. "You want me to lead a division based on one comment at a dinner party? Mr. Foster, with all due respect, you don't know anything about me." He smiled. "I know you graduated summa cum laude from NYU's Stern School of Business. I know you've been sending half your salary to Vermont to support your mother through her battle with multiple sclerosis. I know that despite working for one of the most demanding men in New York, you still volunteer weekends at a women's shelter in Queens. And I know that when faced with losing your livelihood, you chose your principles over security." He sat back. "I'd say that tells me quite a lot about who you are, Ms. Green." Eleanor felt exposed, vulnerable. "You've been investigating me." "Researching," he corrected gently. "After you left, James and I had a conversation. We both agreed that someone with your perspective would be an asset to Horizon. The position comes with a significant salary increase, creative control over projects, and a seat at the table where decisions are actually made." His expression grew serious. "But I won't sugarcoat it. The job won't be easy. You'll face resistance, especially from traditional investors like Maxwell Blackwood." Eleanor's mind raced. It sounded too good to be true, the kind of opportunity she'd given up hoping for years ago. "Why me? There must be hundreds of candidates with more experience." "Experience can be gained. Integrity and vision are innate." Daniel checked his watch. "Take the weekend to think about it. We can meet again on Monday to discuss details if you're interested." As he stood to leave, Eleanor found her voice. "What exactly would this position entail?" Daniel smiled. "You'd be our Director of Social Impact Investment. Your first project? Developing an alternative proposal for that Newark development? Blackwood is planning, one that addresses community needs while still turning a profit." The idea of going head-to-head with Maxwell both terrified and exhilarated her. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." He extended his hand, which she shook. "Oh, and Eleanor, pack up your things from Blackwood's penthouse soon. From what I hear, he's not known for his patience. After Daniel left, Eleanor remained at the cafe, turning the business card over in her hands. The position sounded perfect, almost suspiciously so. Was this some elaborate scheme by Maxwell to humiliate her further? But Daniel Foster had a sterling reputation. He wouldn't risk it for a petty revenge plot. Her phone chimed with a text from Maxwell's assistant. "Mr. Blackwood will be in meetings until 2 p.m. Please retrieve your belongings before then." Gathering her courage, Eleanor headed to the penthouse for the last time. The doorman, Jorge, greeted her with his usual warmth. "Ms. Green, Mr. Blackwood said you might not be coming back. Everything okay?" "Just a change of direction, Jorge," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to collect my things." In the penthouse, Eleanor moved efficiently, packing her few personal items into a small suitcase. As she was about to leave, she paused in Maxwell's home office. On his desk sat the Newark development plans, the very project she'd mentioned at dinner. Hesitating only briefly, she took out her phone and snapped several photos of the documents. If she was going to compete with Blackwood, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. By Monday morning, Eleanor had made her decision. The security and familiarity of working for Maxwell had been an illusion. He could and did discard her without a second thought. Daniel's offer represented not just a job, but a chance to create something meaningful, to finally use her education and skills for something she believed in. Daniel seemed unsurprised when she called to accept his offer. "Excellent. Can you start today? We have office space in the Flatiron district." The Horizon Partners offices bore little resemblance to Blackwood Industries' intimidating steel and glass headquarters, occupying the top 3 floors of a renovated, historic building. The space featured open work areas, abundant natural light, and walls adorned with art from local creators. Rebecca Winters, the firm's operations director, gave Eleanor a tour. A petite woman with a no-nonsense attitude and quick smile, Rebecca had been with Horizon since its founding. "James and Daniel have told me about your background," Rebecca said as they walked. "Impressive education, though I admit I'm curious about the 5-year gap working as a... what was it exactly?" "Personal assistant," Eleanor supplied, though household manager would be more accurate. "I kept his calendar, managed his properties, organized events, and occasionally served as a sounding board for business ideas." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you were doing executive-level work without the title or compensation." Eleanor had never thought of it that way. "I suppose I was." "Well, here you'll have both the title and the compensation," Rebecca assured her, "plus actual respect, which I'm guessing was in short supply with Blackwood." They reached a corner office with windows overlooking Madison Square Park. A sleek desk, ergonomic chair, and small conference table awaited. "This is you," Rebecca said. "We've scheduled a meeting with the social impact team at 11. They're eager to meet their new director." Left alone, Eleanor walked to the window, taking in the view. From this height, she could just make out the top of the Blackwood Industries tower in the distance. For 5 years, she had lived in Maxwell's shadow, making his life run smoothly while her own dreams gathered dust. Now, somehow, she had been given a chance to step into the light. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I hear, congratulations are in order. Not everyone gets poached by Horizon Partners. Enjoy it while it lasts. MB." Eleanor stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. How had Maxwell already discovered where she was working? And more importantly, what did he mean by "while it lasts"? The answer came sooner than she expected. That afternoon, as she was meeting with her new team, Rebecca burst into the conference room, her usual composure visibly shaken. "Eleanor, I need you in the executive suite. Now." In the elegant boardroom overlooking the city, James Thornton and Daniel Foster sat across from a third man Eleanor didn't recognize. The tension in the room was palpable. "Eleanor, this is Andrew Keller, our legal counsel," Daniel introduced them. "We have a situation." James slid a document across the table. "Maxwell Blackwood has filed a cease and desist order against Horizon Partners, claiming we're engaging in corporate espionage by hiring you. He alleges you took proprietary information regarding the Newark development before leaving his employment. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The photos she'd taken, she hadn't even looked at them yet, but legally she had crossed a line. I did take pictures of some documents, she admitted. It was impulsive and wrong. I wasn't thinking. Clearly. Andrew Keller sighed. That complicates things. Blackwood is demanding we terminate your employment immediately and return any materials you took. And if we don't, Daniel asked. He'll sue both the company and Eleanor personally, Andrew replied. Given her admission and the evidence they likely have from security cameras in the penthouse, they'd probably win. Eleanor felt sick. Not only had she jeopardized her dream job, but she'd also put Horizon partners at risk. I'll resign, she said quietly. I never meant to cause problems for you. Hold on, James held up a hand. Maxwell Blackwood is a bully used to getting his way. If we fold now, we're just reinforcing that behavior. He turned to Eleanor. Did you access these documents as part of your regular duties when you worked for him? She nodded. Yes, I was often asked to review and organize project files. And did you sign any specific non-disclosure agreement regarding these projects? No, just the standard confidentiality clause in my employment contract. James and Daniel exchanged looks. Andrew, what if we counter that Eleanor's knowledge of Blackwood's business practices was gained legitimately during her employment? The photos were a lapse in judgment, but not the basis of our hiring decision. Andrew considered this. It's risky, but it could work. We'd need to isolate Eleanor from the Newark project specifically to show good faith. I have a better idea, Daniel said, a slow smile spreading across his face. What if instead of backing down, we invite Maxwell to collaborate? Position it as an opportunity to showcase his commitment to corporate social responsibility, something his investors are increasingly concerned about. You think he'd agree to work with us after this? Eleanor was skeptical. He might, if the alternative is worse. Daniel turned to Andrew. Draft a response suggesting a joint venture on the Newark project. Emphasize the potential PR benefits and hint, subtly, that a public legal battle might raise questions about his business practices that investors would rather not see aired. As the men discussed strategy, Eleanor sat quietly, processing the whirlwind her life had become. In less than a week, she had gone from invisible assistant to the center of a corporate power struggle. Part of her wanted to run back to the safety of anonymity, but a stronger part, the part that had spoken up at that fateful dinner, knew there was no going back. Whatever came next, she was done being silent. Maxwell Blackwood had underestimated her once. She would make sure he never made that mistake again. 6 months could change everything. Eleanor reflected on this truth as she stood at the podium in Horizon Partners' largest conference room, presenting the quarterly results of her social impact division. The nervous, uncertain woman who had stepped into this building half a year ago had been replaced by someone more confident, more assured of her worth and abilities. The East Harlem Education Initiative has already shown a 15% improvement in graduation rates, she explained to the room full of investors and board members. More importantly, the community trust fund we established has generated enough interest to become self-sustaining 3 years ahead of schedule. From the back of the room, James Thornton gave her an approving nod. Under his and Daniel's mentorship, Eleanor had flourished, building a team that approached community investment with both heart and business acumen. Her division had become Horizon's fastest-growing segment, attracting socially conscious investors who wanted returns beyond mere financial gain. After fielding questions and accepting congratulations, Eleanor retreated to her office, now decorated with photos of community events and thank-you notes from local organizations they'd helped. Rebecca joined her, closing the door behind her. That was impressive, she said, perching on the edge of Eleanor's desk. The board is thrilled, but I have news you might find less thrilling. She handed Eleanor a tablet displaying the business section of the New York Times. Blackwood Industries has finally announced its partner for the Newark development. Eleanor scanned the article, her stomach tightening. For months, the Newark project had been in limbo, After Horizon's counter-proposal suggesting collaboration, Maxwell had neither accepted nor outright rejected the idea, instead dragging out negotiations while publicly maintaining his original development plans. Stone Ridge Capital, Eleanor read aloud. I've never heard of them. They're new, Rebecca explained. Founded by Victor Stone, former CFO of Blackwood Industries. Word is, Maxwell set him up with his own firm specifically to partner on projects where Blackwood needs plausible deniability. Eleanor frowned. So it's essentially Blackwood in disguise. What does this mean for the community? Nothing good. The revised plans eliminate all affordable housing components and community spaces. The development will be luxury apartments and high-end retail only. Construction starts next month. The news shouldn't have surprised Eleanor, yet it still stung. Despite her professional success, the Newark project had become personal, a symbol of the change she wanted to create in the world. And now Maxwell was using a shell company to circumvent any responsibility to the community. He's still punishing me, she murmured. This is his way of saying he won. Rebecca squeezed her shoulder. Don't take it personally. Men like Blackwood have been putting profit before people for generations. One person can't change that overnight. But as Rebecca left, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this was indeed personal. In the months since she'd joined Horizon, she had occasionally crossed paths with Maxwell at industry events. Each time he had regarded her with a cold disdain that bordered on hatred. What she couldn't understand was why he seemed to hold such a grudge. She had been nothing to him, a convenient employee, easily replaced. Why did her success seem to bother him so deeply? Her intercom buzzed. Ms. Green, there's a Sophia Martinez here to see you. She says she's from the Newark Community Coalition. Eleanor checked her calendar. No appointment scheduled. Send her in, please. Sophia Martinez entered like a force of nature, her short frame vibrating with barely contained energy. In her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes behind fashionable glasses, she carried herself with the authority of someone used to being underestimated and proving people wrong. Ms. Green, she said, extending her hand. I'm sorry for dropping in unannounced, but this couldn't wait. I'm the executive director of the Newark Community Coalition. We represent the residents of the ironbound neighborhood, the area Blackwood. Industries plans to demolish for their luxury development. Eleanor gestured to a chair. Please sit down, I'm familiar with the project. More than familiar, I hope, Sophia said, setting a thick folder on the desk, because you might be our last chance to stop it. Over the next hour, Sophia laid out a disturbing picture. The Newark project wasn't just inconsiderate of community needs, it was potentially destructive. The area, home to a vibrant, predominantly working-class immigrant community, contained historic buildings, family-owned businesses, and multi-generational homes. Blackwood's development would displace hundreds of families, many of whom had nowhere else to go. The City Council is voting next week on whether to approve the project, Sophia explained. Blackwood has most of them in his pocket, but there's growing public opposition. What we need is a viable alternative, something that preserves the community while still allowing for economic development. Eleanor studied the materials Sophia had brought: community surveys, economic impact studies, architectural assessments. Why come to me? Horizon doesn't have the capital to take on a project of this size alone. Sophia smiled. We've done our homework, Ms. Green. You used to work for Maxwell Blackwood. You understand how he thinks, how he operates. And now you lead a division specializing in exactly the kind of development we want to see. If anyone can create an alternative that works for both the community and investors, it's you. The request was flattering but daunting. Going head-to-head with Maxwell on this project would be risky, both professionally and personally. Yet looking at the faces in the community photos Sophia had brought, Eleanor couldn't bring herself to walk away. I'll need to discuss this with my partners, she said finally. But personally, I'm in. Sophia's relief was palpable. Thank you. The community meeting is tomorrow night at St. Lucy's Church. It would mean a lot if you could attend. After Sophia left, Eleanor immediately sought out James and Daniel, finding them in Daniel's office reviewing quarterly reports. Newark? James frowned after Eleanor explained Sophia's visit. Eleanor, we discussed this. That project is too hot to touch right now. Blackwood would see our involvement as a declaration of war. Maybe that's what it needs to be, Eleanor countered. This isn't just about business anymore. Real people's lives are at stake. Daniel studied her thoughtfully. You realize this would be a full frontal assault on Blackwood's authority. He's not someone who forgives or forgets. I know. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. But if we say we care about responsible development and then back down when it gets difficult, what does that say about us? About me? James and Daniel exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years of partnership. Finally, James sighed. You can explore options, attend the community meeting, gather information, but no commitments yet, understood. We need to approach this strategically. The St. Lucy's church basement was packed with residents when Eleanor arrived the following evening. The mood was a mixture of anger, fear, and determination. Sophia introduced Eleanor simply as a potential ally from Horizon Partners, not mentioning her connection to Blackwood. As the meeting progressed, Eleanor listened more than she spoke, absorbing the community's concerns and hopes. An elderly man described how his family had run the neighborhood bakery for 3 generations. A young mother worried about where her children would go to school if they were forced to move. A high school teacher explained how the development would destroy a community garden that served as both an educational resource and a source of fresh produce in a food desert. When she finally stood to address the group, Eleanor kept her comments brief. I can't make promises tonight, she said honestly, but I believe there's a way to revitalize this neighborhood without destroying it. Development should lift communities up, not push them out. If you're willing to work with me, I'll do everything in my power to create an alternative that honors what you've built here. The response was cautiously optimistic. As the meeting broke up, Eleanor found herself surrounded by residents eager to share their ideas and concerns. One older woman gripped her hand tightly, tears in her eyes. My son used to work for Blackwood Industries, she said. He was let go without warning or severance after 15 years. They said it was restructuring, but it broke something in him. He hasn't been the same since. The woman's story stayed with Eleanor as she made her way home, a seed of an idea forming in her mind. Maxwell's approach to business wasn't just callous, it was ultimately self-defeating. Companies that treated employees and communities as disposable resources eventually paid the price in lost talent, loyalty, and public goodwill. Over the next week, Eleanor threw herself into developing an alternative proposal for the Newark project. She leveraged Horizon's resources, bringing in architects, urban planners, and financial analysts. The result was a mixed-use development that preserved historic buildings, incorporated affordable housing, and created spaces for local businesses, while still offering competitive returns for investors. But creating the plan was the easy part. Getting anyone to listen would be the real challenge. We need to present this at the city council meeting, Eleanor told James and Daniel, and we need to bring community members to speak. The council needs to see the human impact of their decision. Blackwood. We'll be there in force, Daniel warned. He's donated to most of their campaigns. Then we need to make this about more than money, Eleanor replied. We need to make it about the future of Newark itself. The night of the city council meeting arrived with tension hanging thick in the air. The council chambers were divided. Like opposing armies, on one side Blackwood's team of executives and lawyers in impeccable suits. On the other, community members clutching handmade signs and wearing t-shirts printed with "Save Our Neighborhood." Eleanor, dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit, sat with Sophia and the community leaders in the front row of the public section. James and Daniel had insisted on coming as well, providing a united front from Horizon Partners. Maxwell entered just before the meeting began, flanked by Victor Stone and several assistants. His gaze swept the room, faltering momentarily when it landed on Eleanor. For a brief moment, something like surprise flickered across his face, before his expression hardened into its usual mask of cool superiority. The meeting proceeded with clinical efficiency. Blackwood's representatives presented first, showcasing glossy renderings of glass towers and upscale shops, emphasizing the tax revenue and construction jobs the project would create. Victor Stone handled most of the presentation, but Maxwell stood to answer questions, his charisma and confidence clearly impressing several council members. When it was time for public comments, Sophia spoke first, her passion evident in every word as she introduced Eleanor. Ms. Green and Horizon Partners have developed an alternative that proves we don't have to choose between economic growth and community preservation. Eleanor walked to the podium, acutely aware of Maxwell's eyes tracking her every move. Taking a deep breath, she launched into her presentation, explaining how their plan would create more permanent jobs, preserve cultural heritage, and still provide healthy returns for investors. The choice before you isn't development versus stagnation, she concluded. It's between a development that extracts wealth from Newark or one that creates wealth within Newark, between a project that erases history or one that honors it, between displacement or growth that lifts everyone. As she returned to her seat, the public section erupted in applause. Even some council members seemed swayed, leaning forward with renewed interest as community members rose one after another to speak in favor of Horizon's alternative. Maxwell remained impassive throughout, though Eleanor noticed his jaw tightening and his fingers drumming restlessly on the armrest of his chair. When the last speaker finished, he stood abruptly, approaching the podium with measured steps. "Members of the council," he began, his voice deceptively soft, "I've listened with interest to Ms. Green's creative proposal. It's certainly appealing. On an emotional level, who doesn't want to save historic buildings and create community gardens?" His tone shifted, hardening. "But emotions don't build cities, numbers do, and the numbers don't lie. Horizon's proposal would generate 30% less tax revenue over the first 5 years. It would create fewer construction jobs, and most importantly, it would set a dangerous precedent of allowing community sentiment to override sound economic policy." He turned slightly, his gaze locking with Eleanor's. "Ms. Green worked for me until recently. She's an idealist with virtually no practical experience in development. Horizon Partners has never managed a project of this scale. Are you really willing to gamble Newark's future on an untested theory and a novice team?" The directness of the attack stunned Eleanor. She had expected opposition, but not such a personal dismissal of her capabilities. Furthermore, Maxwell continued, his voice dropping to an insinuating murmur, "one has to question the timing and motivation behind Horizon's sudden interest in Newark. Ms. Green left my employment under, let's say, contested circumstances. This proposal feels less like genuine concern for Newark and more like a personal vendetta disguised as philanthropy." The accusation hung in the air. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with anger, but before she could respond, James Thornton stood. "The council deserves to know the full context of this situation," he said calmly. "Horizon Partners has been investing in community-centered development for over a decade. Ms. Green's expertise is precisely why we hired her. Her understanding of both traditional business models and sustainable community development makes her uniquely qualified to lead this project." He smiled thinly at Maxwell. "As for personal motivations, I wonder if Mr. Blackwood's determination to push through this particular plan has more to do with the quarterly earnings report his shareholders are expecting next month than any genuine interest in Newark's future." The council chambers erupted in murmurs. Maxwell's face darkened as he returned to his seat, whispering furiously to Victor Stone. After 3 hours of debate, the council chairman finally called for a vote. The tension was palpable as each member cast their ballot. When the final tally was announced, a narrow victory for Blackwood's proposal, Eleanor felt a wave of disappointment crash over her. They had come so close. As the crowd began to disperse, Sophia gripped Eleanor's arm. "This isn't over," she said fiercely. "The mayor still has to sign off on the development. We have 2 weeks to change his mind." Eleanor nodded, gathering her materials. As she turned to leave, she found Maxwell blocking her path, his expression unreadable. "Impressive performance," he said quietly. You've learned a lot since pouring coffee at my dinner parties. Not from you, she replied evenly. A muscle twitched in his jaw. This little crusade of yours is pointless, Eleanor. The project will proceed as planned. All you've done is waste everyone's time and make yourself look foolish. Eleanor stood her ground, meeting his gaze. If that's true, why are you trying so hard to convince me to back down? Could it be that for the first time in your career, you're actually worried about opposition that can't be bought off or intimidated? For a moment, something like respect flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. Enjoy your moral victory while it lasts. In business, the only victories that matter are the ones you can take to the bank. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. And make no mistake, this is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never spoken up at that dinner. As he walked away, Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. She had known challenging Maxwell would have consequences, but the venom in his voice suggested this had become something deeper than business rivalry. For reasons she couldn't fully comprehend, Maxwell Blackwood had made destroying her a personal mission. What she didn't realize was that in his own way, Maxwell was just as confused by his reaction to her. As his car pulled away from City Hall, he found himself replaying their encounter, disturbed by the intensity of his own anger. Eleanor Green should have been a minor irritation, a footnote in his career. Instead, she had become an obsession, occupying his thoughts at the most unexpected moments. "Sir?" His driver's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Where to now?" Maxwell stared out at the Newark skyline, the buildings glowing in the evening light. "The office," he said curtly. "I need to make some calls." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor threw herself into the fight to save the ironbound neighborhood. While the city council vote had been a setback, the publicity surrounding the competing proposals had galvanized public opinion. Local newspapers ran features on families who would be displaced. Social media campaigns highlighted the historic value of buildings slated for demolition. A coalition of preservation groups filed lawsuits challenging the environmental impact statements. Through it all, Eleanor became the public face of the opposition, her passion and articulate defense of community-centered development earning her a growing reputation in urban planning circles. Several times she appeared on local news programs, directly debating Victor Stone while Maxwell remained conspicuously absent. "He's avoiding you," Daniel observed, after watching one such interview. "You've become a liability to his public image." "Maybe," Eleanor replied, "but he's still pushing forward with the development. The demolition permits were approved yesterday." The battle had begun to take a toll on her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she had lost weight from skipped meals and late nights poring over legal documents and strategy plans. Yet despite the exhaustion, Eleanor felt more alive than she had in years. For the first time, she was fighting for something she truly believed in, and people were listening. Then came the morning when everything changed. Eleanor arrived at her office to find Rebecca waiting, her expression grave. "Have you seen this?" She handed Eleanor the business section of the Wall Street Journal. The headline made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Blackwood Industries acquires controlling interest in Horizon Partners' parent company." "How is this possible?" Eleanor whispered, scanning the article with growing horror. "Horizon is privately held." "Was privately held," Rebecca corrected grimly. "Apparently one of our major silent investors needed liquidity quickly and sold their shares to Blackwood. It was all done very quietly until the deal closed yesterday." Eleanor sank into her chair, the implications washing over her. "So Maxwell now controls Horizon?" "Not entirely, but he has enough influence to make significant changes. James and Daniel are in emergency meetings with the board. They've been there all night." Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang. James Thornton. "Eleanor, we need you in the boardroom, now." The executive boardroom was a tableau of tension when Eleanor entered. James and Daniel sat grim-faced at one end of the long table. At the other end, looking supremely comfortable and utterly out of place, sat Maxwell Blackwood, flanked by Victor Stone and a woman Eleanor recognized as Blackwood Industries' chief legal counsel. "Ah, Eleanor," Maxwell smiled, a predator's display of teeth. So good of you to join us. We were just discussing the future of Horizon Partners, specifically the future of the social impact division. Eleanor felt as though she had stepped into a nightmare. What's happening here? James spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. Mr. Blackwood has proposed a restructuring of Horizon. As a significant shareholder, he has certain rights. Restructuring, Eleanor looked from James to Maxwell. What does that mean exactly? Maxwell's smile widened. It means, my dear Eleanor, that your little experiment in social consciousness is coming to an end. The Newark project will proceed as originally planned, and your division will be absorbed into our main investment structure with a new focus on traditional returns. You can't do that, Eleanor protested. The communities we work with, the projects we've started, will be evaluated on their financial merits alone, Maxwell cut in smoothly. Those that meet our standards will continue under new management. Those that don't, he shrugged eloquently. Eleanor turned to James and Daniel. And you're just going to let this happen? Daniel's expression was pained. We don't have much choice, Eleanor. It's this or a complete hostile takeover. There's always a choice, she said, her voice rising with emotion. Isn't that what Horizon was built on? The choice to do business differently, to prove that profits and principles aren't mutually exclusive? A heavy silence fell over the room. Maxwell watched the exchange with open amusement, clearly enjoying the spectacle of their distress. Well, he said finally, this has been enlightening, but I have other meetings to attend. My team will be in touch regarding the transition. He stood, buttoning his impeccable suit jacket. Oh, and Eleanor, you might want to start updating your resume. Your position, I'm afraid, will be one of the first to be redefined. As he strode from the room, Eleanor felt a surge of determination cutting through her shock. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Maxwell Blackwood might have won this round, but he had underestimated her once before. She wouldn't let him make that mistake again without a fight. The sky outside Eleanor's apartment window had just begun to lighten with the first hint of dawn when she made her decision. After a sleepless night reviewing documents, making calls, and wrestling with her conscience, she knew what she had to do. Maxwell Blackwood had declared war, and she would not surrender without a fight. She called Sophia Martinez first. It's worse than we thought, Eleanor explained, her voice steady. Despite her exhaustion, Blackwood didn't just win the council vote. He's acquired enough shares of Horizon's parent company to essentially neutralize our opposition. Sophia's sharp intake of breath carried through the phone. So that's it? We've lost? No, Eleanor said firmly. We've just lost one battlefield, but there are others. She outlined her plan, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan's skyline in gold and rose as she spoke. By 8 a.m., Eleanor had showered, changed, and was standing outside the offices of the New York Times, waiting for Daniel Foster to arrive. When he appeared, surprise flashed across his face. Eleanor, what are you doing here? We need to talk, privately. They found a quiet coffee shop a block away. Eleanor didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need your help, Daniel. Not as my boss, but as a journalist. He studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. I'm listening. Blackwood's takeover of Horizon isn't just about business rivalry. It's personal vendetta dressed up as corporate strategy. But he's made mistakes in his haste. She slid a flash drive across the table. These are internal memos and communications regarding the Newark development. They show that Blackwood's environmental impact studies were deliberately falsified, that he bribed 2 council members, and that the Stone Ridge Capital Partnership was created specifically to shield him from liability for any negative community impacts. Daniel's eyebrows rose. How did you get these? Let's just say not everyone at Blackwood Industries agrees with Maxwell's methods, Eleanor replied, thinking of the late-night meeting with his former administrative assistant who had reached out after seeing Eleanor on the news. The question is, are you willing to use them? Daniel picked up the flash drive, weighing it in his palm. You realize what you're asking? This could destroy your career as much as his. I know, Eleanor said quietly, but some things are worth the risk. After a long moment, Daniel nodded. I'll need to verify everything independently. No promises. And Eleanor, be careful. Men like Blackwood don't go down easily. Eleanor's next stop was the offices of Harrington and Wells, one of New York's most respected law firms specializing in corporate governance and shareholder rights. Alexandra Harrington, the firm's founding partner, had been skeptical when Eleanor first called, but agreed to a brief meeting as a favor to a mutual acquaintance. 15 minutes, the elegant older woman said, as Eleanor was shown into her corner office with its sweeping views of Central Park. That's all I can spare. 90 minutes later, Alexandra was leaning forward in her chair, fully engaged. Let me get this straight, she said, tapping a manicured nail against her desk. You believe Blackwood violated SEC regulations in how he acquired the Horizon shares? And you have documentation? Yes, Eleanor confirmed. The shares came from Westlake Fund, one of our original investors. According to our bylaws, existing partners have right of first refusal on any share sales. James and Daniel were never notified or given the opportunity to purchase. Alexandra's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a predator who had scented blood. That's a clear breach of fiduciary duty on Westlake's part and possibly securities. Fraud on Blackwood's if he induced them to violate the agreement. She drummed her fingers thoughtfully. It's not enough to reverse the sale outright, but it might be enough to delay implementation of any changes while the courts sort it out. How long a delay? Eleanor asked. Months at minimum. Possibly. A year or more if we can get it classified as part of a larger pattern of corporate malfeasance. Alexandra gave Eleanor an appraising look. This won't be cheap, Ms. Green, and Blackwood will retaliate. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. I understand. The risks. The question is, will you take the case? A slow smile spread across Alexandra's face. Oh, I'll take it. Blackwood Industries has needed a check on their power for years. Besides, she added with a predatory gleam, I've never lost to their legal team, and I don't intend to start now. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor had set her plan in motion. The legal paperwork was being prepared, and Daniel was quietly investigating the evidence she had provided. Now came the most difficult part, facing James and the Horizon board to explain what she had done. The emergency board meeting was tense, expressions ranging from shock to outrage as Eleanor laid out the steps she had taken. You had no authority to engage outside counsel, one board member sputtered. This is a direct violation of company protocol. With respect, sir, Eleanor replied calmly, I engaged Ms. Harrington as a private citizen, not as a representative of Horizon. The legal action will be filed on behalf of the Newark community, Coalition as the injured party, with me as a supporting witness. James Thornton, who had been silent throughout her explanation, finally spoke. Why didn't you come to us first, Eleanor? Because I needed plausible deniability for Horizon, she explained. Maxwell would expect countermeasures from the company. He wouldn't expect them from me personally, or from a community group he considers powerless. A murmur ran through the room as the board members considered her logic. It's reckless, one woman said, though her tone held a note of admiration. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged. But sometimes reckless is all you have left when conventional approaches have failed. James studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. What do you need from us? Nothing active, Eleanor said. Just don't interfere, and maybe start quietly looking for additional investors to dilute Blackwood's influence in case the legal strategy works. As the meeting adjourned, James pulled Eleanor aside. This is a dangerous game you're playing, he said quietly. Maxwell Blackwood isn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he considers beneath him. I know, Eleanor replied. But that's exactly why it might work. His blind spot is thinking that power only comes from wealth or position. He doesn't understand that sometimes it comes from simply refusing to be silenced. The next morning, the New York Times business section featured a detailed expose on irregular practices in the Newark development, complete with excerpts from the documents Eleanor had provided. That same afternoon, Alexandra Harrington filed for an emergency injunction to halt both the development and any organizational changes at Horizon Partners pending investigation of potential securities violations. The reaction was swift and fierce. Maxwell's legal team issued immediate denials and threatened defamation suits. Victor Stone held a hastily arranged press conference proclaiming the development's benefits for Newark. Behind the scenes, according to Eleanor's sources, Maxwell was in a towering rage, demanding to know who had leaked the confidential documents. 3 days later, as Eleanor was leaving a community meeting in Newark, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Green," Maxwell's voice was ice-cold. "I think it's time we had a conversation." The location he suggested was the rooftop bar of a newly opened hotel in Midtown, neutral territory. Eleanor arrived precisely on time to find Maxwell already seated at a corner table with panoramic views of the city, a glass of scotch in hand. "Drink?" he offered as she took the seat across from him. "No, thank you." Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though her heart was racing. "You wanted to talk?" Maxwell studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You know, when you first spoke up at that dinner, I thought it was a momentary lapse, a servant who had forgotten her place. Then when Horizon hired you, I assumed it was James and Daniel making a point at my expense." He took a sip of his scotch. "But now I see I've underestimated you all along." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "You have." A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. The injunction was clever, as was going to the press. "But surely you realize these are merely delays, not solutions. I still own those shares. I still have the council's approval, and I have resources you can't possibly match." "This isn't about matching resources," Eleanor replied. "It's about doing what's right. The Newark community deserves better than to be bulldozed for luxury condos. Horizon's mission deserves better than to be dismantled for a personal vendetta." Maxwell leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Let me make you an offer. Drop the legal challenges, convince the community coalition to back down, and I'll guarantee that 20% of the Newark development will be dedicated to affordable housing. You can even oversee that portion of the project personally." The offer was surprisingly generous, far more than she had expected to win through the courts, yet something in his too smooth delivery gave her pause. "And Horizon?" she asked. "We'll proceed with restructuring as planned." His smile was thin. "I can compromise on Newark, Eleanor, but not on Horizon. You've become too much of a liability to my other interests." And there it was, the true purpose of this meeting. Maxwell wasn't concerned about the Newark development. That was just a convenient battlefield. What he truly wanted was to neutralize her influence at Horizon, to remove the challenge she represented to his way of doing business. "No deal," she said quietly. Surprise flickered across his face. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. 20% affordable housing isn't enough, and abandoning Horizon's mission isn't acceptable. Maxwell's expression hardened. "Don't be a fool. This is more than you'll ever get through the courts, and you know it." "Maybe," Eleanor acknowledged, "but this stopped being about winning the moment you made it personal. Now it's about standing up for what's right, regardless of the outcome." "How very noble," he sneered, though something in his eyes had changed, a flash of uncertainty where before there had been only contempt. "And what exactly do you think standing up will accomplish? One person against a system that's worked this way for centuries?" "Change has to start somewhere," Eleanor replied. "Why not with us, right here, right now?" For a long moment, Maxwell simply stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Then he drained his glass and stood. "You'll regret this decision, Eleanor, I promise you that." She watched him leave, her calm exterior masking the churning anxiety beneath. She had just rejected what might have been her only chance to salvage something from this conflict. Yet the alternative, compromising on her principles, abandoning the communities and colleagues who had trusted her, was unthinkable. What Eleanor couldn't know was that their conversation had affected Maxwell more deeply than he cared to admit. As his car navigated through Manhattan's evening traffic, he found himself replaying her words, One person against a system. Change has to start somewhere. There was something in her conviction that had stirred an uncomfortable recognition within him, a memory of the idealistic young man he had once been, before power and wealth had become his only measures of success. The next morning brought news that sent shockwaves through New York's business community. The state attorney general's office announced it was opening an investigation into potential violations of securities law and ethical breaches related to the Newark development and Blackwood's acquisition of Horizon shares. The investigation would include a temporary freeze on both the development and any structural changes to Horizon Partners. Eleanor was as surprised as anyone. Yes, she had hoped the legal challenge and press coverage might create pressure, but a state investigation went far beyond her expectations. When Daniel called, his voice was tinged with amazement. "Did you know this was coming?" he asked. "Not at all," Eleanor admitted. "I thought we'd get a limited injunction at best." "Well, it seems you have allies in unexpected places. Word is that several former Blackwood executives came forward after the Times article with their own evidence of questionable practices." The news should have felt like victory, but as Eleanor hung up, she found herself troubled by an unexpected sense of, was it disappointment? She had been prepared for a long, difficult battle, had steeled herself for personal and professional consequences. This swift intervention by outside forces felt almost anticlimactic. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. Meet me at the Newark site, 4 p.m. Come alone." No signature, but she knew instinctively it was from Maxwell. Common sense told her to ignore it, to let the investigation run its course. Yet something compelled her to go. Perhaps the need for resolution, or simply curiosity about what Maxwell could possibly want now that the momentum had shifted so dramatically against him. The Newark development site was a study in contrasts. On one side stood the vibrant ironbound neighborhood with its colorful row houses, family-owned restaurants, and community gardens. On the other, construction equipment sat idle beside stacks of building materials, the first phase of demolition halted by the injunction. Maxwell was waiting at the edge of the site, his usual impeccable suit replaced by dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that somehow made him look more approachable. As Eleanor approached, she noticed something unfamiliar in his expression. Uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "Neither did I," she admitted. "Why are we here, Maxwell?" He gestured toward the neighborhood. "I wanted you to show me." "Show you what?" "What I'm missing. What you see that I don't." There was no sarcasm. In his voice, only a genuine, if reluctant, curiosity. Surprised by the request, Eleanor hesitated only briefly before leading him into the heart of the Ironbound. As they walked, she pointed out the details that made the neighborhood special, the community garden where local children learned to grow vegetables, the small businesses that had been in families for generations, the historic church that served as both a place of worship and a community center. "These aren't just buildings," she explained as they paused outside a small bakery where an elderly man was closing up for the day. "They're living history, connections between generations. When you destroy them for luxury condos, you're not just changing the landscape. You're erasing a community's identity." The elderly baker recognized Eleanor and waved them inside, insisting they take fresh bread despite the closed sign, as he chatted with them in Portuguese accented English. Sharing stories of the neighborhood's changes over his 60 years there, Eleanor watched Maxwell's face. For once, the mask of corporate indifference had slipped, revealing genuine interest and, could it be, empathy. As they left the bakery, with warm bread and the old man's blessing, Maxwell was quieter, more thoughtful. They walked to a small park where neighborhood children played, while parents and grandparents watched from benches. "This is what's at stake," Eleanor said softly. "Not just buildings or profit margins, but human connections, community resilience. The kind of things that can't be measured on a balance sheet, but make all the difference in people's lives." Maxwell was silent for a long moment, watching two young girls playing hopscotch on a faded chalk outline. "My grandmother lived in a neighborhood like this," he finally said, his voice so low Eleanor had to lean closer to hear. "In Brooklyn, before it was gentrified. She knew everyone on the block, would sit on her stoop and keep track of all the neighborhood children, make sure they stayed out of trouble. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. When developers started buying up properties, she organized the resistance, refused to sell no matter what they offered. "What happened?" Eleanor asked gently. His expression darkened. "She held out until she became ill. Medical bills piled up. Eventually, she had no choice but to sell." He looked around at the Ironbound, really seeing it for the first time. "I think that's when I decided that in business, sentimentality was weakness, that the only power that mattered was financial power." Eleanor studied him, seeing beyond the powerful CEO to the human being beneath. "And now?" Maxwell met her gaze, something complicated in his eyes. "Now? I'm not so sure." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, they made their way back to the development site. The change in Maxwell was subtle but unmistakable, a softening around the eyes, a thoughtfulness that replaced his usual arrogance. "The investigation will proceed regardless of what we do," Eleanor said, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "But we could work together on a solution for Newark that serves both business interests and the community. A true partnership, not a conquest." Maxwell seemed to wrestle with himself, decades of business philosophy warring with the unexpected. Empathy their walk had awakened. "And Horizon?" he asked finally. "Remains independent," Eleanor replied firmly, "with its mission intact." He studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. "You fought harder for your principles than most people fight for millions of dollars." "Because principles are worth more in the end," she said simply. As the last rays of sunlight gilded the neighborhood in gold, Maxwell Blackwood made a decision that would change not only the future of Newark and Horizon Partners, but the trajectory of his own life. "Let's talk about what a real partnership might look like," he said, extending his hand to Eleanor. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, sensing that this moment marked a turning point for both of them, and for the many lives their decisions would touch. "I think that's the first genuinely good business proposal you've made," she said with a smile. What neither of them realized as they walked away from the development site, deep in conversation about possibilities neither had considered before, was that this unexpected alliance would eventually grow into something far more powerful than either business success or personal victory. A genuine connection that would transform not just Newark, but both their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. 1 year could change everything. Eleanor reflected on this as she addressed the crowd at the Ironbound Renaissance Project's community center opening. "Today, we celebrate not just the completion of Phase 1, she said, but proof that business success and community well-being can go hand in hand." Behind her stood the transformation, restored historic buildings beside thoughtfully designed new structures, affordable housing alongside market-rate apartments, local businesses nestled beside national retailers, and community green spaces. Maxwell sat to her right with James Thornton and Sophia Martinez, an unlikely alliance that had evolved into something remarkable. "None of this would have been possible without true partnership," Eleanor continued. "Partnership between Blackwood, Industries and Horizon Partners, partnership between developers and community members." Maxwell had changed profoundly over the past year. His arrogance had softened into confidence tempered with humility. He remained formidable in the boardroom, but now channeled his talents toward creating broader value. Their working relationship had begun cautiously after that evening in Newark. The state investigation had resulted in significant fines for Blackwood Industries. Maxwell had divested his Horizon shares, instead forming a joint venture specifically for Newark. Early meetings had been tense. Eleanor remained skeptical of Maxwell's apparent change while he struggled to adapt to collaboration after decades of autocratic leadership. "Remember the first community planning session?" Eleanor smiled. "We had translators for 5 languages, residents in their 80s sitting beside teenagers, business owners, artists, teachers, construction workers, and yes, some heated debates." The crowd chuckled. Those sessions had sometimes devolved into passionate arguments, yet produced a development plan that respected the community's history while creating opportunities for its future. What made the difference was that everyone truly listened to each other, and in that listening we found common ground. She didn't mention their private conversations, late-night strategy calls, early morning meetings, the gradual shift from wary colleagues to friends. She didn't speak of how she challenged his assumptions about business success, or how he pushed her to implement her ideals more pragmatically. And she certainly didn't mention the moment, 6 months into their partnership, when everything changed. They had been reviewing architectural plans surrounded by blueprints and takeout containers when Maxwell suddenly fell silent, staring at her. "What?" she had asked. "Do I have sauce on my face?" "I'm in love with you," he said simply. Eleanor had frozen. "I'm sorry?" "I'm in love with you," he repeated more firmly. "I didn't plan it. I certainly didn't want it. But there it is. Maxwell, we work together. We've only just started to trust each other professionally. I know. Believe me, I've given myself all the logical arguments against this. But logic doesn't seem to be working. This could complicate everything we've built," she warned, though, recognizing the anticipation fluttering in her chest. It could, he acknowledged, or it could make it stronger. Instead of responding with words, Eleanor had leaned across the table and kissed him. Now, as she concluded her speech, Eleanor's gaze found Maxwell. He gave her a small, private smile that still quickened her pulse. "Today is not the end of our journey," she told the audience. "Phase 2 begins next month, focusing on educational initiatives and small business incubation, and similar projects are now being planned across the country." After the ceremony and reception, Eleanor and Maxwell stood alone on the community center's rooftop garden. Manhattan glittered in the distance while below them, the revitalized neighborhood created its own constellation. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Eleanor asked, leaning into his embrace. "Here on this rooftop? No. Here in this relationship working together? Definitely not. Funny how life works out. Not funny, miraculous." Maxwell turned to face her. "I was thinking about my grandmother. During your speech, the one from Brooklyn, she would have been proud of this, not because it's financially successful, though it is, but because it's successful humanly. It makes people's lives better." Eleanor felt a tightness in her throat. "I think she'd be proud of you too, not just for what you've built, but for who you've become." "I spent years chasing success through profit margins and acquisitions. I thought power meant having people fear you." He took her hands in his. "You showed me there's more power in earning respect than demanding compliance, in creating systems that lift people up rather than exploit them." "We showed each other," Eleanor corrected. "I needed your practicality as much as you needed my idealism." The past year had been a delicate balance, merging their personal relationship with their professional partnership, navigating skepticism about Maxwell's transformation, building trust with wary communities. There had been arguments and setbacks, yet they had grown stronger together. "I have something for you," Maxwell said, reaching into his pocket for a small velvet box. Inside was an emerald ring catching the city lights. "I chose an emerald instead of a diamond," he explained nervously. "They represent growth, patience, and wisdom, everything our journey has been about." "Maxwell," Eleanor breathed. "You challenged me when everyone else deferred. You saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. You've made me not just more successful, but more human." His hands were steady. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor marveled at their unpredictable journey. "There's something else," Maxwell said. "Blackwood Horizon Foundation. I want you to lead it as executive director. The board has approved. You have the vision to make it a force for real change." "What about Newark? Phase 2 is just beginning. The team can handle it. You'll still be involved, just at a higher level. It's time to scale your approach nationally." "I'd be honored," she said softly. 6 months later, they married in the central plaza of the development, bringing together executives and community organizers, high society figures and local shopkeepers. Sophia Martinez, now the Foundation's community liaison teased during her toast. From servant to queen. Except our Eleanor was never really a servant, and Maxwell had to learn that being a king means nothing if you rule alone. They established a scholarship fund for students from underprivileged communities, pursuing degrees in urban planning and social entrepreneurship. In the years that followed, the Blackwood Horizon Foundation became a leader in reimagining urban development. Their integrated approach proved both morally right and financially sound. On the 5th anniversary of the Ironbound project, Eleanor and Maxwell brought their 3-year-old daughter, Sophia Grace, to visit. As the little girl played in the community garden, they watched with pride. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't spoken up at that dinner?" Eleanor asked. Maxwell smiled. "Sometimes, but I prefer to think about how much more we'll accomplish in the next 5 years, together." The vibrant neighborhood stood in stark contrast to Maxwell's original vision of sterile luxury towers. Instead, it was a living community where diverse people lived and worked together. "Success looks different to me now," Maxwell reflected. "It's not about what I can take, but what we can create. Not about how much I can control, but how much I can contribute." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "That's the real transformation, not the buildings or programs, but the perspective." As they headed home with their daughter, they walked not as CEO and former assistant, not as adversaries or even just partners, but as family, bound by love, purpose, and the belief that with courage and compassion, even the most entrenched systems could change for the better. Their story had begun with an arrogant gesture and a moment of courage. From that unlikely beginning had grown a partnership, a romance, and a shared mission touching countless lives. Perhaps the most powerful change was the most personal. Two people seeing beyond their initial perceptions, discovering depths neither had imagined existed. And in that discovery lay their greatest lesson. That transformation, whether of a neighborhood or a heart, begins with the courage to envision something better and the persistence to make that vision real. Fim da Historia Dear. Listeners, we hope Maxwell and Eleanor's journey from adversaries to partners has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that transformation often begins with a single brave voice. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. We bring unique stories daily that explore life's complexities and human connection. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments.